Hi, everyone. Welcome to one of our BD School videos. Today with me, there is Bhushan Sethi. Hi, Bhushan, how are you?
Very well. How are you?
I'm very good as well. Thank you so much. So Bhushan actually works at PwC, but he does a lot of other things as well. So I won't take too much of your time, and I let you do the introductions and tell us a little bit more about you.
Thanks, Lucia. Really good to be with you today. I'm a partner at PwC. I work with a lot of big companies to help them with things around transformation. Sometimes that's technology driven, including AI. Sometimes that's around cost and growth. Sometimes it's around helping them reorganize their operating model or think about their people. I also have been doing that for a number of years. I also teach part-time at NYU Stern School of Business. And I also spend some time helping with institutions like the World Economic Forum and the G20 and producing policy briefs and sharing some of the work that I do with clients to influence policymakers, whether that be on how do we think about productivity, how do we think about introducing artificial intelligence in a responsible way, or how do we think about cybersecurity for vulnerable populations. So really delighted to be here and have this discussion.
Likewise, and thank you so much. And as I said, guys, is a busy guy, so thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. And I also want to say a little anecdote on how we actually got to know each other for those who didn't hear the story yet. So a few months ago, we actually hosted a webinar on business development trends for 2024, and I quoted Bhushan on the slides. I'm actually very curious. How did you find that webinar? Because then you reshared it on Instagram, but I'm very curious. How did you find that?
I track when I've been mentioned in media or on social feeds, etc. And it came up, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. Let me see, because I think it was a quote from one of the reports that we published last year. And so it's always interesting to see where these things are used, whether it's in media or academics or other companies' research.
Oh, thank you so much. I was quite curious. I was also very surprised and happy when I saw that you reshared it. So thank you so much for that. But that, everyone, is how we got to know each other. Of course, then the power of LinkedIn. We got in touch on LinkedIn, and here we are today. And well, because Bhushan has such a large and vast experience on many different topics, when we were talking about this conversation, we were discussing, okay, so what should we talk about? How can we add the most value to our BD community? And we actually thought of some questions that are very, very common in the business development community. They're going to be all related to building a successful business development career, but we really want to help you to solve these four main challenges, I would say, that every business development rep faces. So without further ado, let's get started with the questions. The first one, Bhushan, is, and I would like to give also a little bit of context. Now, one of the main reasons why the BD School exists is that not many companies like to provide training to their teams, or sometimes, especially if their team are a little bit experienced, they kind of expect their team to know already what to do, right? So they hire new people, or even the people that are already having the team for a while, they hire them, and then they just give them their targets without really giving them much context and guidance, you know. So how can you do it? So if you're an individual contributor and you end up in a company that doesn't really provide you with training, resources, documentation, or any sort of guidance, how can you be a productive member of the company? So what can you do from your side to try to bring these results that the company is asking you for?
I mean, it really starts with the type of business that you're in. Sometimes people think about selling as a dirty word. They're like, oh, you're trying to sell me this technology product or this professional service, or this unmet need that I don't really kind of want to procure. But what we got to understand is whatever business you're in, a non-for-profit, big company, consumer products company, technology company, if your business offers a service or a product that there's value around, you've got to be able to explain to your customers or your consumers kind of what that is, how it meets their needs. Obviously, there's going to be a value exchange. It costs money, and not everything's going to be free. but it's really understanding what your business is, what your customers are, how you communicate and tell the story about what the needs are, and really listening to your customers around kind of what is it that they need. Do they need this particular product? Do they need more functionality? Does it meet their price point? Are there alternative products in the environment? But it really starts with understanding your business, understanding who the customers are. Even if you're not in a business development role, I think that business development and telling your company's story from a product and service lens is everyone's responsibility, whether you're in the back office, whether you're servicing calls in a call center, whether you're in human resources, or whether you're in an official sales role.
Yeah, totally. But I think that's really where most people struggle with, because sometimes, and it happened to me as well, working for some companies where there was really like no documentation whatsoever, right? Especially at least in my experience, it happened when I was working for small startups, because, well, then the founder has a very prominent position, let's say, but a lot of the information is really stuck in their head, right? So it's not really publicly available. So where do you think is the line, between being like too proactive and maybe, like taking too much initiative in the sense of maybe contacting your customers to try to survey them and so on? And where can you, let's say, ask for guidance, but in a way that is not perceived as, I don't want to say like inexperienced or, like annoying, but really in a way that is productive for both the manager and the individual contributor?
Yeah, so where there isn't sufficient knowledge, there's kind of three things you've got to really understand. You've got to understand and go to school on like what are the products and services that your company's in the business of selling. If you're in pharmaceuticals, really understanding those needs and kind of what does it do for the end patient? Are you selling to an intermediary like a care institution? So really understanding that, and that's just building the knowledge. Potentially using technology. If you've got a customer relationship management system to say, who's buying, etc. If you're using market intelligence to say, what are their alternatives? What are our competitors selling, etc. So there is a role of technology. But I'd say the vast majority of this is human skills. It's getting out there, telling a story, listening to customers, bumping into people at conferences who might have needs, understanding, different types of customer segments, and just being in the market and having discussions. And storytelling, it's a mix of listening, it's a mix of influencing, but it's really important in the ethics around this. Not everyone needs your products. Not everyone can afford your products. There are alternatives. And again, whether you're in the service or the product side, that's also really important, because what we're talking about, Lucia, is relationships. And sometimes in my business, we stay with customers, even if with clients, and we engage in discussions, even when there's no projects, because it's about building relationships and bringing expertise and insight. And whether that client has business for us in 6 months' time, or that client just thinks better of the firm, maybe that client goes to another company, maybe that client joins us at some point, the relationships are sticky because they really build trust. And companies can see, people on the receiving end can see who is in it to be transactional and who actually wants to build a relationship or really meet their needs.
You bring a very interesting point, actually. And maybe it's more a question for me. How do you keep the relationships alive with the customers, right? This, like, personally, the struggle I had for in the last 5 years actually was always keeping a balance between finding new business, keeping the relationship alive with existing clients. And I also have this problem that I don't want to be, again, annoying, in the sense I don't want to be there like constantly like calling our clients or sending an email and so on. I feel like I want to reach out with value and with meaning. And sometimes, I kind of prevent myself from reaching out more regularly. So do you have maybe some tips or best practices to really keep the relationship strong without being too intrusive in a way? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, the first thing is, this is where technology helps. I mean, we met on through social media. We criticize social media a lot because it's got a lot of externalities and has brought a lot of harm and screen addiction, and we probably all spend too much time on it. But it connects the world, and from a client perspective, clients know who you are and what you're doing what products your companies have, what research your companies put in the market, because you can share that with some of the platforms that we've mentioned. So that's a good thing. So no longer are the days when you have to convene thousands of people in a physical room in a conference to say, we've launched a new product, or we've launched new research, or look at what I've been doing, because they can see that. In terms of the relationships, I think it's always, you've got to prioritize a few types of companies, a few types of buyers, and spend time with them, whether that's virtual, whether that's in person, periodically, every few months, etc. And it starts with what's on your agenda. Like, what problems are you solving? How are you dealing with bringing artificial intelligence into your company? How are you dealing with this high interest rate environment? And also, to the extent that you can, you're comfortable, something personal. Your kids, how are your kids doing in college? And again, not to be salesy and not to be creepy, but knowing something about them on a personal level, if they've just shared something on LinkedIn where they've done a university tour for their son or daughter. But anything that you can do to connect on a personal level. I love English football, and so I often find wherever I go in the world, people like English football, and it's just something we talk about. Those are the things to kind of like get with your clients to really understand what's their agenda, even when there's no sale or transaction. Because if you understand their needs and you build that relationship of trust, when there is a need, they'll kind of like, they'll bring you in. There's some of the thoughts.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, you really like marathons as well. That is another thing. I think that was actually what got us talk again. So like I saw your post on running the marathon. So yeah, thank you so much. Because this is something I personally struggle a lot with that, and I know that also a lot of our clients and a lot of our students have the same problem, right? So really, how to manage these relationships and really make them strong. So thanks a lot for the tips. Now, another main challenge for business developers, I had it since I started my career, but maybe also because I'm a bit too outspoken, maybe. And I'm very creative. I have a lot of ideas all the time. So what happened to me and what happens to many business developers is that sometimes we go to our managers with all these ideas and they seem all brilliant, at least in our mind, I guess. But the managers are not so open to trying that idea, right? So it's like, okay, well, this initiative seems great, yeah, sure, I see some value, but let's focus on what we know how to do already. Now, I think that's a bit of a problem in BD because business development is very experimental. So if we're looking for the next big thing, the new business opportunities, which are not just new clients, right? But really could be potentially a new value proposition, a new product, a new service. You need to be able to experiment and to try with new things. But if you find the resistance from your manager, it can be a little bit complicated. So how can you navigate that? How can you convince your manager to implement your ideas, but refraining from the how to influence people and how to win friends and influence people type of books, right? So something concrete if you have.
Yeah, so a couple of ways I've done it. One, on the professional services side, when our clients say to us, look, this is great ideas, but it's just not that it's just too much change for us. It's risky. We don't know if we have the budget. We say, let's get people in the room and let's ideate around this thing, because none of us really knows if it's a product issue, if it's a supply chain issue, if it's a technology issue. Let's invest some time, 4 to 6 hours. Let's get people in the room. Let's use some things like design thinking, really understand what the problem statement is, and spend some time to ideate with your team to say, is there an action plan coming out of this that we can help prioritize? And that's helpful for them because they get people together, they ideate, and they come up with something prioritized. If you're in the technology or the product land, there's a whole piece around how you implement something in a minimal viable products. And so whether you could take a piece of a value chain, a piece of technology for a small part of a business and say, can we design this? Can we test it? Can we pilot it? Can we use agile techniques to then say, what did we learn from this small piece of functionality with a smaller cost and smaller time duration? So this concept that has obviously come from software development around MVP and agile, we're applying that to many of our recommendations in professional services now, whether it's redesigning supply chains, whether it's restructuring organizations, whether it's thinking about releasing new bits of technology. So there are a couple of ways that I would think about it. But again, it comes back to listening to your customer. And if a customer says, look, not now, not the right product, I think there's that, we got to move on, because the relationship is actually more important than any of those transactions.
Yeah, totally. And really more from a manager, individual contributor perspective, right? Just personally, what I felt when that happened was like, well, my ideas are not worth it. This company doesn't really appreciate me. I don't like this manager. That's it. I'm going to be gone. And that's unfortunately the destiny of many business development professionals. Like the tenure in the company is not that high, typically 6 to 9 months. And then people move on to new ventures, let's say, for many reasons, of course, but this can be one of them. So maybe do you have some tips on really how to manage the relationship with the manager?
Yeah, I think we're on is like, how do you innovate in companies? How do you drive more creativity? In our research that we've done, empowerment is something that people really value today. Like in a world of high inflation and lower returns, it's hard to just give people significant pay rises. But those non-financial benefits around, am I empowered? Can I ideate? Is there an innovation area where I can actually test some of these new ideas and new products? And so I'd really encourage leaders to say, where can we create small experiments, whether it's AI, whether it's new product launches, whether it's kind of new value propositions, as you mentioned, and give people space to be creative. So many companies talk to us about, we need to reinvent our business model. We need to think about new areas of value creation. We need to think about AI not just as a productivity tool, which it obviously is now, but in the future, how can we unlock new markets? How can we think about new value? Think about, the area of drug discovery in the healthcare sector. So we have to give time and we have to give empowerment to people, or we're not going to be able to think about new business models, new sources of value creation, whether it's for a company or whether it's for an entire industry.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, I totally agree. Actually, in our training, big part of it is really dedicated to the experimentation, process. And I just talked yesterday with one of our students, and she was telling me that she actually organized the first experimentation meeting with her team. But she was talking exactly about this struggle, like really how to win the resistance to change, right? With her senior managers, because that was a little bit the challenge. But I think personally, what I did was always to insist, in the sense that if I really believe in that idea, I'm going to try to convince you in any possible way. But sometimes it's tough, because then it puts you a bit on it doesn't put you always on a good light, I would say, especially maybe if you have some managers that don't necessarily like to, not to be contradicted, but in a way, right? You're contradicting their authority, right? But that's why I led by saying maybe I was too outspoken. Maybe that's why I had this problem.
Some of the old-fashioned techniques about when you have a resistant boss, you spend time with them and you make it feel like it's their idea. And then you deploy it in an agile way. You make it feel like their idea and it's their success, and everyone's happy. So there's some, humans have been resistant to change very often in business. They'll continue to be as we have more change and more technology and more fear. And so I think it's just listening, it's ideating, it's showing, not telling. I think there's some of these techniques that have really tried to, been tested over time, which are still relevant on the human side.
Nice. Yeah, the first one, I also suggested it to her. I was like, just made them think it's their idea. It works. We just said it, right? So people like to feel empowered. So I think also from a manager perspective, especially maybe they just you just didn't have that idea, but even if you like it, maybe your ego is a little bit on the way. I know that also from the other side, to be fair, as a founder, I found myself in that situation, where maybe my team was like, oh, maybe we can try this and that. And it took them a long time to convince me. And eventually they were good ideas. So I should have listened to them a little bit earlier. So good reminder for me as well. Another problematic, which is really related to office politics. Now, in my experience, office politics is present a little bit everywhere, in the sense like you can be working in a very small startup. There can be office politics, the way to, big corporates where it can be a thing as well, office politics. Now, that can be a little bit of a problem, again, as an individual contributor, because maybe, again, your manager refuses to give you access to some information. That is the case of one of our students recently, actually. And, really simply because that person is let's say, the owner of that file, literally, and wants to keep the authority on that. Now, obviously, in a modern workplace, I think office politics shouldn't really have a place, but we're humans, so office politics does exist. How do you navigate that, and how do you navigate it, especially if you have a bit of a stronger personality, right? So that doesn't really get along with that very well. Again, personal question.
We all struggle with this. I mean, office politics, again, are important. The first thing you got to do, whether you're new to a company or whether you're in a company, is understand the politics in your own company. Politics is about power struggles. It's about opinions, it's about divisiveness and polarization, the same thing as it is in our society outside of the workplace. And every company's got a different culture and how decisions get made. Some of my clients, I understand their interactions and how they make decisions. That one of the banks I work with is very consensus driven. And you can't just, it's not top down like some of my other clients where it's very hierarchical and you have to kind of get the leader convinced and then it gets cascaded. This particular bank that I work with, you have to have a lot of socialization. You have to kind of meet people at different levels and socialize the idea, because an executive will not make a decision until they understand how sales feels about it, how product, how technology, how human resource feel about it. So just understanding those politics. We see it when new executives come into companies, they try and change that. And this culture, the culture stuff's hard to change. One individual, regardless of their role, it's really difficult for them to come in and change something. So it's really understanding it and then playing within those strengths. So if the office politics is they don't like really creative ideas, you got to figure out, like, how do you seep that in through innovation? How do you kind of make sure that different leaders kind of feel that they have ownership over those ideas, and then it becomes kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. If it's an area where it is a top-down culture, whether you like it or not, it's at least understanding that and making sure that you get your ideas to kind of very senior individuals, you get them on board and help them drive this in the organization, because in some organization it is cascading it's putting it in people's objectives. So it's understanding those dynamics. But there's a couple of other things that are really critical, especially in today's environment. You can't compromise on your values. If you really believe in being yourself, speaking your mind, as long as it's respectful and tolerant, and if you're working with people who are intolerant, and whether I'm talking about whether I'm talking about sexual orientation, whether I'm talking about gender identity, whether I'm talking about what's happening kind of in the world on social issues or war or religion, if you're in an environment that doesn't jive with your values, there's only one possibility: you have to leave. Because no one can be successful in an office environment where there are politics that are completely at odds and intolerant to their values. And that doesn't mean, Lucia, that firms can't have people that have different opinions on social issues, etc. But there's a way that, just like in any family, people have to coexist, even if they have different perspectives, because they agree on the values of humanity and listening and respect and tolerance, even if they feel differently about a war or an election that's happening in a particular country, or even a political issue or a social issue.
Yeah, I totally agree. Personally, as I said before, maybe I'm too outspoken, which also meant that my tenure in some companies was also not that long, but exactly for this reason. So to me, it's very clear, like I never want to compromise on my values. So it's if we're really very far away, I just don't see the point. However, I think I consider myself lucky in the sense that I think I'm quite resourceful, so I don't really get discouraged. Like even if I lose a job or if I quit a job, I'm not necessarily scared of what's going to happen next. But I think for many people, maybe there isn't necessarily this confidence, let's say, in what could happen if I leave this job, right? But I completely agree with you that it's either you play by the rules as long as you're happy and you're not really compromising your mental sanity, or, and that's my advice always, is like, just leave. The word is big enough in the sense that you can always find a company that values you for who you are and where you can really add value in the best possible way. And
maybe,
because
Lucia, you were not being outspoken. Maybe you were not being outspoken. Maybe you were in the wrong culture, because there are
yeah.
some companies that really value people speaking up and giving their ideas. And again, this is public information. There's a hedge fund called Bridgewater, which you've probably heard of, which is legendary. Its founder, Ray Dalio, who's now retired, talks about transparency and talks about radical truth. And in that organization, he's written books about it, etc. They talk about being incredibly candid. So, and that's an extreme, but you've got to go find the crew, the company, the types of individuals where you can be yourself. And again, kind of consistent with your values. So I hear that all the time, and I especially hear it from young females, that they say I'm being outspoken, and I say no. We need more people speaking up, but it needs to be with respect and tolerance and evidence-based. And you can advance your company's agenda. You can advance some of these social issues we're dealing with as well.
Yeah, totally. And I think the part of evidence-based, I think it's super important, because I think very often, and this is an advice mainly maybe for the youngest one. So that's something I would tell probably to my younger self. It's really this one, to always go with facts. Like there is no idea that you can bring forward that is too abstract. It just doesn't work like that. At the end of the day, we like we like concreteness, we like numbers, we like to see things. So I think that's super important. That's a very important point. As a
And
last
Adam
thing,
Grant, yeah, sorry.
go
So
ahead, go
Adam
ahead.
Grant says something that I think that stuck with me when I spoke to him once. He said, "You've got to always think like a scientist. Like it's not about opinions, and sometimes it's not even about facts. It's what data are you going to collect to fulfill this hypothesis? Like what data do you need, whether it's a new product launch, whether it's a change, business process, etc. It's like always think like a scientist and think about hypotheses and think about data and experimentation and A/B testing so you can prove it. Don't just come with a bunch of opinions or data."
Awesome. And well, hopefully one day you present me to Adam Grant as well. But because you were talking about it, and obviously you're a very successful and accomplished professional, what is your tip, or like maybe some best practices or tips or a piece of advice or wisdom that you could give to some young business development professionals that really want to build a career in this field? So they're not there just, to change job every 6 months, but they really want to build a successful career, maybe advance, get promotions, and really get to the top of their companies. What is the secret ingredient that really enabled you to become so successful in your career? And maybe you want to share that.
The best advice I got was 30 years ago when I entered the workplace in a company called Boots in Nottingham in England. And my first boss was an amazing guy. And he said to me, he said, one of the things you have to do is always ask good questions and challenge everything. So back to your being outspoken. So ask good questions, challenge the status quo, and always think about who your customers are. And I was in an internal consulting role, but those things stuck with me, and especially the challenge everything and ask good questions. I was really lucky that I was allowed to do that in my family. My father and mother allowed me to ask all kinds of questions like, why did we emigrate from India? Why are we Hindu? Why are we being raised in a white neighborhood? Like I was asked, why is there a war in Ireland right now? Why is there a war in Iraq? When I was growing up, I could ask all kinds of questions. I try and encourage my own children to ask really good questions. But back in business, 30 years later, I'm still the guy who asks all these questions. How does AI influence, how we're going to redesign work so we augment roles with AI? So it's just being curious and asking all the right questions in the right way. I think that's just being curious about how technology is going to impact us, how regulation might change. That's like my number one thing. I think everything else comes from curiosity and asking good questions.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Bhushan. This was so insightful. Again, very selfish because many of the questions were really more for me, but I hope you guys also found a lot of value in this conversation. Bhushan, thank you so much again. Enjoy the rest of the day and have a great weekend as well.
Thanks, Lucia. Great to talk to you.